Song Invitation will be number 791, On Bended Knee.
Good evening. If you have a Bible, I ask that you'll go ahead and grab it or find one of the ones that we have put all throughout. I know Neville's been pushing that we use those. There's plenty of them for everybody to have. Go ahead and grab one for me and open it up to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. You know, a lot of times I think we overcomplicate things in our lives. That's not a really clever thing I thought of. That's very obvious. I think you all agree with me that we make our lives a lot more complicated than they need to be. I mean, we go to jobs where a lot of the time half your day is spent just making sure everyone's okay with how you did something. You have to make sure I did this paperwork right, that I sent this email right. Everything is just making sure we did it just right. We come to church, and a lot of times we overcomplicate things here. We make sure everything is perfect. We make sure that everyone's happy. And those are all good things. They all need to be done. But sometimes we just overcomplicate it. People, if you're trying to lose weight or if you're trying to get more in shape, if you do one Google search of how do I get more healthy, someone's trying to sell you 20 different plans for all these steps you have to do, when really it's a lot simpler than that, but still just as hard. How do you improve friendships? People try to give you, well, you have to do these 5 things. You have to make it more complex. You have to buy them things. But really, it's very simple. In America, in our world, throughout all of history, we've always tried to overcomplicate things. So tonight, for just a couple minutes before we sing, I want to talk about the idea of simplicity. There's a whole movement for simplicity now. It's called the minimalistic movement. And it's in a lot of the younger generations. Everyone's moving downtown into small apartments with simple desks, simple tables, simple food, and it's turning into a bit of a craze. But I think it's something we all can actually take some notes from. Not the idea of being trendy and following along with this, but simplicity. Not worrying about those minute details, not being so focused on complexity that we miss the actual picture. Flip with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And I ask you to grab a Bible because we're going to read about 25 verses just straight through. I know you probably don't want to just hear me read, but I think we'll all focus better if you read along with me. We'll hear it, we'll read it, and I want to get through this entire section. Starting in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of man is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. Now that was a lot of reading, so long that my phone dimmed and I had to tap back into it. But I had a purpose for reading all that. That's one big section, and I did not want to take just a single verse and run with it from there. There's a lot. There was a lot of wisdom, folly, foolishness, wisdom, back and forth. It gets confusing. So as we're looking through it, keep reading it, keep finding things from it. But I want to draw your attention to one specific verse in verse 21 to start. Rereading verse 21. For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. A lot of times we'll see people getting up here to speak, or we get up to speak. We're talking to somebody, and we think the words we're saying are really clever. We think the way we said it, the way we phrased that, we did pretty good. We think, well, I gave them the 5 steps to salvation. I did pretty good with that. But this verse, it struck me. It says, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. It's important to note that what we're doing, what we say, whether in person, from the pulpit, wherever, it is complete folly. Sure, what we're saying can be correct. We can be preaching the word. But when we look at God's wisdom, when we look at what he has said, the author of this book, whatever we say, even when it's right, is just complete folly. We have no clue the depth of what we're saying. You come to our present day. I read a book recently. It's called The Right Side of History, and it talked about how Western culture developed, our whole morality, our social system, and all that. And it said it came from two things. It was called Athens and Jerusalem. And so Athens and Jerusalem are sort of reason and revelation. Your revelation is the Judeo-Christian morality, the idea of the Ten Commandments, started with the Jews and came to us. And then your reason was Athens, where people finally started to think critically, Socrates and people like that. And the author claimed that everything we have here is due to those two things. And I was thinking through that, I thought that makes a lot of sense. You have logic, you have religion, it all comes together. And then I read this verse in chapter 1, in verse 22. For Jews demand signs, and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. It really is a lot simpler than the whole idea of Jerusalem and Athens, reason, revelation. It all comes to a head with Jesus crucified. Yeah, he fulfilled the old law. He made this new covenant. He brought every single thing together. The entire inner workings of Western culture all come to a head in Jesus. Jerusalem, Athens, logic, reason, it's all Christ. And sometimes we try to overcomplicate things so much. We try to explain in our politics and our day-to-day conversations why we're right, but really all we need to be focusing on is Christ and him crucified. Everything else revolves around that. So bringing all this together to make it more simple, like we're talking about, what can we take away from it? Looking back through this passage, number one, earthly wisdom, even if you are the wisest man in the world, pales in comparison to even just God's foolishness, if there is such a thing. Anything God says is 10, 100, 1,000 times wiser than anything man has ever thought of. That should really humble us. And on a happier note, you might not be the most educated person in the world. I know you're not the most educated person in the world. I'm not. I never will be. You might not be the smartest person in the world. You'll never have as much knowledge as the next person. But God says, I don't care. He says, I don't care if you are the best one in the world. You're still nothing, but you're something with me. He's saying it doesn't matter if you have 5 PhDs after your name. If you're with me, that doesn't matter. I don't care where you graduated from. You're with me. And that takes a lot of pressure off you. You don't have to worry about, am I smart enough to talk to this person? Am I wise enough? Can I get up here and speak? Will they listen? The word of the cross is folly to those who don't believe. But to those who believe, you can keep reading. It's everything. So tonight, as you're thinking about simplicity, sure, we can follow this craze of simplifying our lives and selling off a lot of the stuff we own. But don't miss how simple the cross truly is. Everything in the West, everything throughout history, all came to a head with Jesus hanging on that cross. And that's the basis of our Christianity. It should be the basis of our lives. So when you're going through your day-to-day lives, tell people about that. Tell them about that simple cross, what it's done for you, and how everything in your life, all the craziness, the holiday season, all comes back to that cross